Good morning, students of class 11. Today is 13th September 2021. In my early class, I told you about the source of the poem The Sigrose, about the poet William Blake. Today, we will read the poem. In my early class, I have told you the rose is a symbol of beauty, modesty, purity, love, while the worm is a symbol of decay, experience, death, evil force, etc. Let's start. O rose, thou art sick. The poet addresses the poem. I have already told you here the rose is personified here. So the capital R is used in this poem. O rose, O rose. The poet addresses the poem. O rose, thou art sick. The poet finds the rose sick. O rose, thou art sick. The poet addresses the rose. The rose is a symbol of beauty, modesty, purity. It stands for a beautiful girl, actually, with innocence, beauty, modesty, purity. But the poet addresses the rose as sick because the rose has lost its innocence. The rose has lost its purity. The poet has lost its modesty. Clear? O rose, thou art sick. Thou means you. Here it refers to the rose. O rose, thou art sick. Sick means physically and mentally ill. Physically and mentally ill. The poet calls the rose sick. The poet calls the rose sick. The invisible worm that flies in the night. The invisible worm. The invisible means that cannot be seen. The invisible worm. I have already told you a worm. Actually, worm is a thin creature with no bones or limbs, actually. But here the worm is a mysterious evil force. It symbolizes the destruction of beauty, destruction of innocence by his secret love. Actually, it has in biblical references. Worm is the moral corruption. Worm is a symbol of moral corruption. That the invisible worm that flies in the night, it is attacked by the unseen worm which flies on night in the howling storm. In the howling storm that flies in the night. Actually, the invisible worm, the unseen worm which flies in the night. Clear? The worm is an evil force. The worm symbolizes possessiveness, jealousy, male sexuality, and evil force of destruction, etc. In the howling storm, howling means making long loud noise. The storm is making a terrible sound at night. This storm is howling, violent storm. The worm is strong enough to withstand the violent storm. The invisible worm is flying in the night in spite of the terrible or violent storm. Clear? The invisible worm, the unseen worm is flying in the night in spite of the violent storm. These are the 4 lines. The poet addresses the rose. He calls the rose sick, both physically and mentally. He mentions the invisible night worm and its movement in the violent storm. Has found out thy bed of crimson joy. Has found out thy bed. Has found out thy bed. Has found out thy bed of crimson joy. Has found out thy bed means your bed. Found out thy bed. Your thy bed means your bed. Ultimately, the beauty of the the worm has found out thy bed. Your bed. Thy means your. It is an archaic word, অপ্রচলিত শব্দ. Crimson joy. Crimson means হচ্ছে crimson dark red in color. But the word crimson suggests sexual pleasure. Here crimson suggests seduction of the rose by the worm. Seduction of the rose by the worm. So, the repressed sexuality of the rose has been artistically emphasized by the word crimson. Actually, the rose is publicly modest but privately passionate. Crimson joy suggests both sexual pleasure and purity. We will discuss this particular word in my next class. And his dark secret love. And his dark secret love. That love has not been announced. Dark secret love. This is another symbolical words. Dark secret love. We will discuss these particular words later on. Does thy life destroy? His dark secret love, the dark secret love of the worm has destroyed your life. Your life means the life of the rose. Clear? The poet finds the rose sick. The worm flies on stormy night. The rose lovingly shelters the worm. The worm bites the rose bleeds. It bites the rose to bleed. Ultimately, the beauty, the purity, the modesty of the rose withers away. The rose dies. As a symbolical poem, it has a deeper meaning. The rose stands for love, beauty, purity, modesty, innocence. The worm is selfishness, experience, evil force of destruction, etc. The deadly bite of possessiveness makes love death pale. Innocence is lost by experience. Here, innocence is lost by experience. Innocence is lost by experience. Beauty is lost by jealousy. These are the very important words. Innocence is lost by experience and beauty by experience, jealousy.